particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. And friends, we thank you for tuning in. In these challenging times, Town Hall is grateful for the opportunity to invite Seattle audiences into present tense exchanges of issues, ideas, and creativity, even when we don't get to, do it in person. Town Hall will continue to produce virtual content throughout this fall and into the new year, and as circumstances allow, even host live streams from our building. Meanwhile, if Zoom or YouTube fatigue hasn't fully set in, many of our past talks are available in video or podcast form on our digital media library. But back to tonight. The program will likely last about 40 minutes, to be followed by an audience Q&A. Congressman Swalwell and Heck will select questions from those submitted in the Ask a Question field at the bottom center of your screen. We can't guarantee that they'll be able to get to every question, but they'll try to get to as many as possible. So keep your question concise, please, to facilitate that. Also, you should know that you can view the event either on Crowdcast right here or on our YouTube page if you want to utilize the closed caption feature on YouTube. Meanwhile, Town Hall is adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming programs include BJ Cummings, James Rasmussen, and Paulina Lopez about our unexpected regional reliance on the Duwamish River. Jonathan Slate on the quest to find and save the world's largest owl, as well as events later this week with George Dyson and Rick Perlstein, and a future file featuring Cass Sunstein, Aaron Brockovich, Jill Lepore, Senators Sherrod Brown and Chris Murphy, Michael Ian Black, and Alex Ross in conversation with the great music critic Ann Powers. You'll find plenty more about those, most of the above listed, already online at townhallseattle.org. Town Hall's programs are made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Civics programming in particular is supported by the Real Networks Foundation, the True Brown Foundation, KUOW-FM, and the Wyncote Foundation Northwest. But finally, as most of you know, Town Hall is fundamentally a member-supported organization, and I want to thank all of our members who are watching tonight. As you can imagine, the response to COVID-19 has brought great challenges to nonprofits, and Town Hall alone has cut its budget by over a third in an effort to navigate the coming year. And so we're truly grateful to you for purchasing a ticket for tonight's program. If you support Town Hall's mission to keep programs accessible to the whole community, we hope you will consider further support with a membership or by making a donation through the button at the bottom of your screen. And I should mention that this isn't an easy time for booksellers either. And since we know you will want to buy a copy, to read more about the House's work on impeachment after tonight's talk, I urge you to buy a copy of the book and to do it tonight through our local independent partners at the LA Bay Book Company. You can use the link on this very page rather than, later on after some reflection through a stateless multinational conglomerate. Please do the work of buying your book tonight. All right, then. Congressman Eric Swalwell was elected to the House of Representatives in 2012, representing California's 15th congressional district, which encompasses much of California's East Bay area. He serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Judiciary Committee. Over his 4 terms, Representative Swalwell has championed a number of policy proposals, including gun safety and buyback measures, higher education reforms, and increased investment in medical research. Before election to the House, he served in the office of the District Attorney in Alameda County, California, as well as a term on the Dublin City Council. That's Dublin, California, that is. Congressman Denny Heck was elected to the House of Representatives in 2012, representing Washington's 10th congressional district. I don't know why I can't say that word this evening. He serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and is the only representative from the Pacific Northwest serving on the House Financial Services Committee. He's known for his focus on job creation, care for veterans and military families, and for retaining the health and beauty of the environment in the Pacific Northwest. And because I know you're all following local politics, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that he is currently a candidate for Lieutenant Governor of our state, Washington. Representative Swalwell's book, Endgame, Inside the Impeachment of Donald J. Trump, is the subject of tonight's talk. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Denny Heck and Eric Swalwell.
Where joining this evening as a little bit of a bizarre circumstance insofar as everything Eric and I are going to talk about tonight as it related to the Intelligence Committee. Well, I was in the room too, but in addition to the Intelligence Committee, Congressman Swalwell also serves on the Judiciary Committee, from which the articles of impeachment actually emerge. No person holds public office unless it is a part of a family endeavor. So you should also know about Eric Swalwell, that he is married to Brittany. They have 2 very small children, Nelson and a little girl named Cricket. And we're going to hear more about her later. Also, in the spirit of disclosure, I've read Eric's book. It's a terrific read. Find the button that says buy the book. Support your local books favor by getting this terrific account of the impeachment journey in the House of Representatives. Quickly, though, I want to make sure that you all have a bit of a perspective about who Eric is as an individual, because it will inform what perspective he took to writing this book. And interestingly enough, even though being a member of the same class on the same committee, being a good friend, I learned about him reading this book, including, Eric, the fact that 9/11 played a critical role in your decision to enter public service.
It sure did, Denny. In fact, I was a 20-year-old on Capitol Hill on that dark day as an intern. And as dark as it was, a memory that I took away from that was being scared, having our security shaken, but seeing our members of Congress arm in arm, hand in hand on the Capitol steps later on that evening on television, singing God Bless America. And they used unity in the months after that attack as an antidote to future attacks. And the country was safer because they came together. They created a September 11 commission. And that inspired me, especially after what Russia did in 2016, to believe that's the course that we should have taken. I have to thank you for doing this, my friend. Congratulations on advancing in the lieutenant governor's race in November, and also Ware and Town Hall and your members. It's really an honor to be with you and the Emmy award-winning Denny Heck.
Thank you, Eric. So, Eric, 9/11 helped prompt you into a life of public service, law school, assistant prosecutor, Dublin City Council. And then in 2012, you did something that not a lot of people do when you ran for Congress against a very long established incumbent. Tell that story briefly.
Yeah, I was 30 years old when I announced a run. I'd been a planning commissioner, an arts commissioner, a city council member, and serving as a prosecutor, a line prosecutor, a deputy district attorney. But redistricting happened. And in California, we voted the 2 years prior to have an independent redistricting commission. So politicians were no longer protected by the party in charge or able to protect their friends. And God forbid we based the lines on geography and math. But also we passed, inspired by what Washington had done prior to us, the top two system, where any voter from any party could vote for any candidate. And I thought, with all the issues facing young people, they needed a voice for those issues. And also that I could not only go to Democrats, but also independents and more centrist Republicans. And so we knocked on every door, regardless of the party. And it was a Democrat on Democrat matchup in November. And we were able to prevail. But, really
against Eric, against an incumbent who had held public office how long?
40 years, yes.
Right.
Came to Congress in 1972, and we ran in 2012. And you, Denny, I know were elected at age 24 in the legislature, and you go there and, honestly, you look at all these, giants in the Congress, and I didn't really know how I'd be received by my colleagues because I ran against someone in our own party. And it was Speaker Pelosi very early on, then Minority Leader Pelosi, who told me, she said, hold your head up high. You are a full-fledged member of Congress, and we are your peers. And that made me feel a little bit better because I didn't know what to make of, Nancy Pelosi or anyone else who has supported my opponent.
Well, you've done just fine as it happens. And so that commitment to public service propelled you to election to not just 4 terms in the State House of Representatives, but last April or a year ago, April, you announced your candidacy for President of the United States, I think on the Stephen Colbert Show, as it turns out. And a few months later, when it obviously was not in the cards for you, you withdrew from that and then re-entered the race for re-election to the 15th Congressional District in California. I guess my questions as it relates to your presidential bid, Eric, are you glad you did it? And would you ever consider doing it again?
Thank you for remembering that I did it. And Denny, you played such a big role in recruiting and supporting the candidates that ran in 2018 in the midterms as a part of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. And I was inspired, especially on the issue of gun violence, by the number of candidates who came to Congress. I think 19 of them beat NRA endorsed members of Congress. And I had been working with the Parkland kids and the March for Our Lives generation. And when we elected, 29 new members in their 40s and under, I thought it was a real moment to seize, and wanted to have a candidacy for the White House that would promise to take on gun violence, ending student loan debt, standing up on climate, and ran on those issues. But what I found on the campaign trail pretty early on was how anxious the voters were about a second Donald Trump term, and they really were not in the mood for a generational candidacy. And one example I'll give you, I was in an Iowa living room in Davenport, Iowa. It was a supporter of mine, and they're talking to their friends and family as they introduce me on the stump. And the owner of the house, the host, says, "And I want to introduce you to someone who I don't think is going to win this time, but I think he'll probably run again." And I looked at the guy and I said, no, I'm running to win this time. I'm glad I ran. I learned a lot, about myself and certainly the country, but I ran to win and make a difference. When that didn't work out, there was certainly work to do in the House. And honestly, I advise our interns, don't get into politics for certain offices, run on issues, and you'll find the office. And I'm sure whatever the future holds, if I stick to the issues I care about, I'll find a way to serve.
You definitely avoided answering directly the question of would you run again? Remember, I get up at the same time of day as you do in this.
Yes, you do.
Business. Let's turn to the book. Why'd you write it?
I wanted to have a tribute to the heroes that you and I heard from that came into the Capitol 3 floors below in a secure room without any television cameras. And very early on, when we didn't know what exactly we had, we saw people who risked their livelihood and their lives to speak truth to power. And I wanted the public to know, and I also believe that courage begets courage. And so if we tell their stories, as I believe more corruption is going on inside the Trump administration, perhaps people will see that it is okay to come forward. I also wanted to frankly condemn those who were silent and complicit in their silence, whether it was people who did not come forward and testify or colleagues who enabled the president's corruption, but also to write it as a call to action that although we did not see Donald Trump removed by the Senate, that we're not helpless. And just as we elected that House majority in 2018, we have a job to do now in the next 80 some odd days until the election, and we can impeach and remove him at the ballot box. And that's what we must do.
We're probably going to come back to that theme, but first I want to ask you about your process of writing. As you know, Eric, I'm a little bit of a hobbyist writer too, having completed now 4 books, and enjoy that process very much. I'm often asked, and I now ask you, how do you find the time? What is the process by which you undertake this? And not written in your book, but what you shared with me privately, was a pretty unusual way that you kept track and contemporaneous in your chronicling of events, which you would later go back and make into a book. Share that story about how you
Denny, I remember asking you a couple times, knowing that you had written a book, just how the hell do you do this? And you were very kind to share with me ideas. So I had long wanted to write a book about my father, who was a police chief and stood up to corruption in Iowa, where I was born. And so I had kind of the foundation of a tribute to what he had done. And I had gone back and looked at the Des Moines Register and Algona Times archives, to really put together his story. And once we went into impeachment, I saw this parallel. Although he was a small town police chief standing up to a mayor's corruption, we were in the middle of, a pretty big corruption scheme. And I thought there was a parallel there between, being willing to lose your job to do the right thing. And my dad ultimately lost his job, but was vindicated in the press and by the editorial boards of those papers. And we saw a lot of people who were willing to lose their job, like Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, Masha Yovanovitch, et cetera. And I had, I guess, the foundation to write the book. The way that I actually was able to, do it, because we spent long hours during those depositions, was at the end of the day, whenever I was with my then almost 1-year-old daughter, instead of reading to her or singing her a song, I would take out my cell phone. I downloaded a dictation app, and I would tell her what had happened that day. But I had to do it in a sing-song voice, otherwise she would get fussy and frustrated. And I had, I guess, to do it in a way that it was not going to be referred to Child Protective Services, because this is a very dark story of what we were experiencing. So one audio clip, Denny, that I just can't get out of my head was reading to her. And then Mr. Schiff told Mr. Meadows, you are not recognized. Please sit down now. And so it had kind of like a Dr. Seuss cadence to it, but I was able to move that, into a Word document. But the cooperation of my daughter Cricket gave me a shot at writing this book.
So I really enjoyed your book, Eric, and I thought it was highly readable. And I think it's important to note, this is not by Eric Swalwell and so-and-so. These are your words out of your mind as expressed on these pages. And you write like you've been writing all your life. You mentioned both Ambassador Yovanovitch and Colonel Vindman as two of the noteworthy witnesses that we had the opportunity to take depositions of, but there were dozens and dozens in the Intelligence Committee.
Right.
When you think back about that process in that windowless room 3 floors below the Capitol, where we're not allowed to have electronics, is there a witness that in particular stays in your mind as the most interesting or the most provocative or your favorite? Did you have a favorite witness?
Yeah, I would say Masha Yovanovitch, especially in the public hearing. Having the president tweet at her and just being unshakable and not flinching. And as you remember, when she stood up as Chairman Schiff banged the gavel, the whole room erupted in applause. And I'm getting goosebumps now just recounting that experience. And she just walked out with her, dignity intact. But a witness that I do not believe received enough credit was David Holmes. So the day that Masha Yovanovitch testifies to us above ground with the cameras in the committee hearing, right when that testimony concluded, we went back below ground because we had just learned days before about this new political counselor officer in Ukraine. And this is the most phenomenal story because his boss, Ambassador Taylor, testifies below ground to us about the corruption scheme he was witnessing. And we later made that testimony public. So here you have David Holmes over in Kyiv reading the deposition of his boss, mostly because he's curious because his boss just testified to Congress. And throughout the deposition, our Republican colleagues are saying over and over to Ambassador Taylor, well, all you have is secondhand knowledge. You don't have firsthand knowledge. All you have is hearsay. And David Holmes is thinking, well, I actually have firsthand knowledge because I heard Ambassador Sondland talk to President Trump, and President Trump is asking about the investigation of Joe Biden. And so he raises his hand, comes forward with this firsthand knowledge, and the next thing he knows, he's sitting with us right after Yovanovitch testifies. That hearing with him went all the way up till just before 11 o'clock that night. And I just thought it was so fascinating, and it showed, as I said, courage begets courage. Taylor came forward. Holmes reads his deposition, and he feels comfortable because Taylor had taken the ultimate step of coming forward, and we had now, validation of Taylor's story.
Just to make sure viewers understand this, Eric, that was Mr. Holmes sitting in the restaurant, overhearing the telephone conversation between the President of the United States and the Ambassador to NATO, Gordon Sondland, in open and public space, having a conversation about these events. Eric, I have to tell you, you and I have not had the conversation privately about who our favorite witness is.
Who was yours?
But Masha, Ambassador Yovanovitch. This is a woman who had steadily progressed in responsibility throughout her long and distinguished, I want to say 33-year career, maybe 31-year career at the State Department. I believe she won the department's highest award 5 different times. It was some just unbelievably unprecedented career there, widely respected, serving under both Democrats and Republicans, and somebody that I thought gratuitously the administration sought to destroy. He kept saying, I have the authority to replace her as ambassador, and he was right. So I tried to destroy the reputation of this career civil servant who had done so much on behalf of us, but yet her resolve throughout it all and her ability to maintain her dignity touched me very, very deeply. Of course, several witnesses did, but I couldn't agree with you more that she was pretty special.
And I thought our chairman's point was the best with her, which Chairman Schiff would say this over and over. If you truly wanted to fight corruption in Ukraine, as Trump said he wanted to do, she was the person you would keep, not the person you would get rid of. And the fact that he got rid of her told us everything about what he would want to do next.
So aside from David Holmes, who would you look back and say was particularly damning as a witness to these events?
Certainly Fiona Hill, right? And when Fiona Hill was testifying to us, and she told us about the interaction with John Bolton, and Bolton saying that I'm not going to be a part of any drug deal that Mulvaney and
Eric, tell the viewers who Fiona is.
Yeah.
Please.
So Fiona Hill was essentially John Bolton's number two, especially on the issue of Russia, Ukraine. And so she's working on the National Security Council and is becoming aware that there's this scheme that the president has in place to withhold your taxpayer dollars to Ukraine unless the Ukrainians help manufacture dirt on Joe Biden. And so Hill starts to get word of this as the Ukrainians come and visit, and she's in a meeting with Bolton. And she was really the first witness, Denny, who put Bolton, in the center of all of this when she testified to Bolton's firsthand knowledge. And that's when we started to realize we really need to get Bolton in, because Hill was about one step away from the president, but Bolton was directly connected to the president. So we really needed Bolton, but I thought Hill, again, tied the president, to this scheme pretty tightly.
But we didn't get Bolton. And what do you think?
His book was called In the Room Where It Happened. And the room where it actually happened is where you and I listened to these witnesses come forward and swear testimony. And as I said, risked everything to do so. And so while he may have written a best-selling book that lays it all out, that to me was akin to a firefighter showing up as the building is in ashes with his hose in his truck saying, "Hey guys, I'm here to help." And it's like, well, this place was burning a while ago and we really could have used you. And so I would never put him in the same category as Hill, Yovanovitch, and Vindman. We certainly are looking at his claims, in his book, but he could have been a real service to his country, and he chose not to.
One of my favorite chapters in your book, chapter 31, Total Skiff Storm. I refer to this as Pizzagate. I've never been so stunned in my life as the events of that day unfolded. Do you want to describe them?
Well, the SCIF, it's a secure compartmentalized information facility. And so this is the place where you and I, every week that we're in Washington, a number of times a week for a number of hours a week, we go in there. Before we walk in, we put our cell phones in a cubby. We walk through a door that's about this thick. There's no cameras inside. Our staff cannot go with us. Any notes we take have to stay inside. And anything the committee does is classified for at least 25 years. It's a secure place physically, but it's also figuratively a secure place in that we trust each other because we know that your participation in that room will not be weaponized against you. After, I believe, Denny, it was the day after Bill Taylor testified, Ambassador Taylor testified to us. Donald Trump has Matt Gaetz and other Republicans at the White House after Taylor testifies and essentially says to them, fight harder. So fighting harder meant that the very next morning we had a Pentagon witness, and she really was not as pivotal as other witnesses, but we had to prove our case and tie the money to the White House. So just as she's about to sit down, you and I start to hear this chanting of "Let us in, let us in." And we see this parade of Republican members with their iPhones in hand and their Apple Watches on their wrists come into the room. The witness is now gone, and they're pointing at Chairman Schiff, screaming at all of us. What was so funny, Denny, is, most of them actually were allowed to come in anyway under the rules that we had set up, but they wanted to make such a skiff show, I guess, of the whole thing. But I described in the book that, we had a couple decision points there. Certainly the witness, Laura Cooper, I believe was her name, was not going to testify in that environment. And so the chairman went to his office, and the sergeant of arms comes into his office. The sergeant of arms runs the security for the Capitol and tells Mr. Schiff, look, I can remove these guys. They're not allowed to be here. They're certainly not allowed to have their electronics. Or we could get you another room, or we could reschedule this. And you and I have the privilege every day of seeing, how made of steel Adam Schiff is. And he said, we're not going to remove them. That'll give them exactly what they want. We're not going to change the rooms because this is our committee room. We own this space. and we're not moving the date because that's also what they want. They want to derail this process. He said, let's just wait him out. And I think he recognized that these colleagues of ours, they were no John Lewises, right? They would sit there for maybe an hour or two, they would get bored, and they would leave. And the next vote that was called, they all left. And we had that witness come back that afternoon, and we got her testimony in. And again, that I think was really a tribute to our chairman. I think lesser people would have made the wrong call in that situation, and he stuck to his guns as he did the whole process.
And more about Adam Schiff later. It's called Pizzagate because they had intended to stay long enough that they literally ordered pizza in. My most vivid memory, and I have to say how psychologically taken aback I was that they would commit such an egregious breach of national security by bringing their electronic devices into that space, because it is protected. And our nation's deepest secrets are kept within the confines of that physical facility. And they seemingly didn't care in advancement, frankly, of a publicity stunt.
And Denny,
should add,
just to give the viewers a sense of what you and I think about when we go into that room, it is, and I don't know if you're like me, but I 2 or 3 times, every hour I'm in that room, I'm patting myself down just because I had like a panic that maybe I accidentally brought something in. That's not been the case, but that's how mindful you are not to let any device in that could possibly, jeopardize the security, because it's about force protection for our troops. And as you said, national security.
The other day we were in there, frankly, and I had forgotten that I kept my earbuds in my pocket. And I wondered if that was a violation. And I was panicked. I had this anxiety attack. I asked, and my earbuds were okay. But until I got clarification, I thought, oh my goodness, I've done wrong here. But what I remember about that day, frankly, Eric, was that there was a Republican member. I've actually written about this in my book, yet to be published. I do not reveal his name, and I don't know if you'd be comfortable doing that. I don't know if we should. But he was real bothered by this too. And he got a box, and he walked around the room and told his fellow Republicans, come on, give me your phone. Give me your phone. Give it up. And he kept walking and walking. They didn't all do it, but he collected as many as he could and turned it over to the security. Do you remember that, Eric?
I do. I do remember him, and I don't always agree with what he does on the committee, but he's been on the committee long enough that he knows the risk, and he was respected enough by them that I think they started to see how silly it was that they had done that.
So what we ended up doing, obviously, was drafting articles of impeachment, largely predicated on the Ukrainian scandal. I need you to do us a favor, though. But arguably, there were any number of breaches of protocol and law that could have constituted grounds for impeachment. But this was the one that was chosen. Think that was a good idea?
Denny, once we moved our case to the Judiciary Committee, it was a matter of great deliberation. Essentially, the question being, do you prosecute the case of abuse of power, which was the Ukraine scandal, using taxpayer dollars, asking a foreign government to cheat an election, or do you ring the president up and give him a CVS-like receipt with every single crime that he's responsible for that is this long, including the 10 violations the Mueller report found of obstruction of justice, including being individual one in the Southern District of New York prosecution of Michael Cohen, and then of course many other acts that we were concerned about but didn't necessarily have as much evidence. On the Ukraine case, though, Denny, as you know, we built this case like a traditional white-collar crime case, outside in or bottom up, they would say, and we had a number of witnesses that put the president at the center of the scheme. And while on other matters it was pretty clear what Donald Trump had done, this is the one that had the best evidence. And on other matters, the problem was that we had witnesses who just refused to come forward, and we'd have to litigate those in the courts. So what we ultimately landed on was abuse of power. And being advised by people like Professor Larry Tribe and other constitutional scholars, we believed that there was no higher crime against the Constitution than abuse of power. And then also to preserve our right, as a, as the predominant, institution of our branches of government, the first branch, the first article in the Constitution, we charged the president with obstruction of Congress for categorically refusing to turn over any documents in our investigation.
Chapter 47, Schiff shines. You alluded to it earlier. You and I couldn't more strongly share the perspective that Adam Schiff was a towering figure of character and integrity and calmness and intelligence throughout this process. I have had the privilege to intermittently be involved in public service over some decades, and I can unequivocally state that I've not served with anybody for whom I have greater respect than Adam Schiff. I think you share that.
I second that, Denny. And, I have to say that, Chairman Schiff, not everything you described, but also, really he was, the first among equals. Like he involved, everyone on the team, and he cared about, how we viewed the case. He wanted to make sure we could all participate. And I think that said just a lot about who he was. But I described in the book, and you remember at the end of each hearing, he would give this summation, this closing argument, if you will. And he would, for 7 to 10 minutes, just go over what the witness had said and what was at stake and what it meant for our country. And by day 2 or 3, I leaned over the dais and thought, surely he was working from some script that he had written. No, nope. It was all right here. And that showed the practice and preparation that he had, the knowledge of the case, and the passion that he, put in. And as he spoke, especially on the Senate floor, as we all watched him, you got the sense that he was not only speaking to the present, the jurors in the Senate, but that he was speaking to future members of Congress who would surely look back on his words as they maybe one day, have to sit in judgment of a president. And as we looked back on, the founders and other people throughout our country's history as to how they viewed corruption, I think Adam Schiff's words will be timeless.
I think he's an historic figure, if I can be blunt.
I agree.
And with respect to his questioning or his speech giving on this subject, you're right. Always a beginning, a middle, and an end. Cogency to his argument. Never said or ah. Never had a note or rarely had a note from which to work. I just don't know of anybody of greater character or greater native intellectual prowess.
But his sense of humor is not known enough.
That's
he is
good
one of the
point.
Funniest guys that you'll meet, and his timing is just pitch perfect.
Yes, very dry sense of humor.
Yes,
he's a very funny man in private. So we did impeach him, and he is impeached forever. But he was not removed from office. I remember another instance during depositions in that room, Eric, at which we were both present, and it was a long morning. The witness was, as it were, impeaching the president very considerably with sets of details and facts. And throughout the course of the morning, the members of the minority basically were acting as very aggressive defense counsel for the president, irrespective of the information, the confirmed information being placed on the table, frankly, as they often did. And we took a break. And one of our colleagues, who shall go unnamed, Jim Himes of Connecticut, wandered down to our end of the table. And to no one in particular, he said, "What would it take? What would it take? Is there anything that you believe could have turned their hearts to being open-minded to the seriousness of the behavior that went on here?"
Not to cross that Rubicon to vote for impeachment. And you talked about the Republican who collected the cell phones. There's another Republican who was not on the Intelligence Committee, but on one of the committees that was allowed in to the depositions. And I don't know if you recall, he's not running for re-election, but he would sit there with his head in his hands and just shaking it as we heard this damning testimony. And he spoke out a couple times on CNN that he was open-minded to impeachment. And boy, was he attacked. And then a couple weeks later, he said, "I'm not running for re-election." And I thought we had a chance with that colleague of ours. And I thought if he can't even get there, we don't have a shot at any of these others. And that's what was so frustrating. And that was why during the Russia investigation, as we heard equally, damning information about the president embracing Russia, we would hear privately concerns from our intelligence committee colleagues about what the president was doing. Russia's not a friend. But then they would go publicly defend him. And I just moved from trying to change their minds privately to being convinced that all we could do was change their seats in the election. And thank God we did in November 2018, because had we not, Denny, we would not have been able to hold the president accountable through impeachment.
You've done everything but name him, so I will. That's former Ambassador Francis Rooney from Florida. And I believe that
he built the skiff. Did you know that?
He built the skiff?
So before he went to Congress, so after
he was
September
in construction.
11, he was in construction. And so after September 11, they commissioned a new intelligence committee room in the visitor center of the Capitol, and his company built the skiff.
So I believe that Congressman Rooney got there because of the State Department and the respect with which he held, for which he held some of those members of the State Department whose careers were being destroyed for no good reason. The questions of the viewers. You began to describe some of this at the outset, Eric, but I think it bears elaboration. We didn't get there. Your book argues, doesn't matter. It was well worth it. Why?
First, he was worthy of being impeached as far as the facts were concerned. And I believed if you don't impeach someone for doing that, just take it out of the Constitution. But second, I was really worried, Denny, that if we did not impeach the president, that a future corrupt president could come along and he or she could say, well, Donald Trump did this and this and this, and you didn't impeach him. And I certainly did not want to be responsible for seeing the standard of conduct lowered because we did nothing. Third was something that I did not appreciate until we were in the midst of our public hearings, and especially because of the evidence that we elicited. The only reason Ukraine ultimately got the aid that we had voted for to help them fend off the Russians was because we launched the investigation. We started the investigation and they had still not received the aid. Once the investigation starts, they receive the aid. And as you know, Denny, nothing changed as far as the BS reasons that the administration was giving as to why they were holding up the aid. Nothing changed from when we started the investigation and they gave them the aid. That showed me that if you stand up to the president, if you check him, you still get the correct, result as far as the policy change that you're hoping to see. Finally, again, this was never a thought of ours, and we certainly did not know a year ago who the Democratic nominee was going to be. But I certainly believe that the public has now been inoculated from the spurious attacks that the president has made on Joe Biden because we, brought them to light in our investigation.
It'll make for a fairer fight November 3rd. Okay, we're going to get to questions. We have a few in the queue, but if you would like to submit one, please do. We'll try to get to as many as possible. Here's the first one. Eric, did you ever seriously believe that the Republican Senate might actually vote to convict? And what did you think when Senator Romney did?
I thanked him. Actually, the night before that vote, Denny, you recall, it was President Trump's last State of the Union. And Senate, we're standing on the aisle. I'm always assigned to the aisle, and people have joked that the speaker puts me there because she knows that I'm not going to be reaching out and getting a selfie with the president. And so, it's a parade of Supreme Court justices, cabinet officials, our colleagues across the Senate. And as Mitt Romney came down, I stuck my hand out and I said, Senator, thank you so much for the courage you've shown, because up until the vote, he had voted to hear from witnesses, which most of his colleagues had not voted for. And the next day, I felt pretty good that he was going to do the right thing, and he did. So I'm happy that I was able personally to thank him, and I think the country owes him, a lot of thanks as well. As to the Senate, this was really a chicken and the egg problem, because if we just assumed that the Senate would acquit the president, then there would be no responsibility on our part to develop the case. And I believed it was like Field of Dreams. If you build it, maybe they'll come. So if we build the case, then they have to decide. And I also did not want to let them off the hook, because I did believe that they should have to take that vote and show their constituents where they stood. And Denny, the only regret I think I will have 5, 10, 15 years from now when it comes to this president is that we didn't do enough. It'll never be that we were too hard on him or we did too much oversight. I think we'll learn
or unfair.
More. Yeah, or unfair. That's right.
Well, again, the book is Endgame, Inside the Impeachment of Donald Trump. You've got a buy the book button on the bottom. Do yourself a favor, use it.
Okay.
Next question, and we covered this a little bit before, Eric, but let's give this person an opportunity to hear a more fulsome answer. Did the House consider impeachment charges for emoluments and profiteering, nepotism, lying to the federal law enforcement, making acting appointments that exceeded time limits, diverting funds from Defense Department projects to the Wall project, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, we absolutely did. And credit to, on emoluments at least, our colleague Jamie Raskin, a constitutional scholar, a professor who has really done the lion's share of the work on this issue. But the concern there was, again, we've been stymied in the courts, to learn as much as we believed we would need. And again, I think there was something to be said for just having a simple case on abuse of power where you had your witnesses lined up. Again, I may years from now regret that we didn't do more, but when it comes to removing somebody who's elected from office, I really believed that, we wanted to have a cogent case, and we certainly did there, but it was certainly not without debate among our colleagues. I don't know where you came down on that, Denny.
Same place. I don't think enough time has passed for us to have a full reveal of what ultimate wisdom may have been. But we already know something that I think would inform that, and it's the earlier discussion. I call this the Fifth Avenue rule. The president has said he could shoot somebody in Fifth Avenue and his voters would stick with him. It's the answer to our colleague Jim Hines' question. Is there anything that could have happened that would have caused this to turn out differently or to turn minority party members' minds to a place of openness? And the answer pretty clearly at this stage is no. Next question. The president has acknowledged that crippling the United States Postal Service's ability to mail ballots. This can not only impact returning ballots, but also getting them in the first place. What can the House do? We're going a little contemporaneous here in our questions. There was a development on that just today. Eric.
You and I just received an email from the Speaker calling us back to Congress this week to vote to fund the post office. And we're going to do that. And, it's just a matter of whether the Senate and the president will go along. There's no question that this president is sabotaging the mail, welcoming foreign interference, enabling misinformation, and will do anything to hold on to power. And why would he do that, you may ask? Well, I believe that aside from his authoritative ambitions, he is possibly the first president who faces criminal charges when he leaves office, and not just federally where he could perhaps try and pardon himself, but locally, uniquely locally. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office is moving full steam ahead on its case against him. And so the incentive to try and cheat is real. And so what we can do, not being helpless with this majority, is to bring the Postmaster General forward. We're doing that next Monday. Have this vote to fund the post office, but also make sure that every person has a plan to vote. That is not only mailing their ballots in, but recognizing that you may see that effort disrupted and having a second and third backup plan. But I really believe the American people, Denny, are resilient. They know what's at stake, and they're going to get it right.
If I may,
please.
His name was Jess Roper. He delivered the mail in rural Texas from 1905 to 1944. He began by delivering it on horseback. One day in August, during a heat wave coming into the tiny town of Henrietta, with him on top, his horse fell over dead. One of the biggest days in his life was getting a Model T. And one day, delivering the mail in his Model T, he was robbed at gunpoint. He delivered the mail for nearly 40 years until he dropped over dead while fixing a fence on his hardscrabble farm. His name was Jess Roper. He was my grandfather. Mr. President, this will not stand. Period. All right. Trump's impeachment now seems, you're more than welcome. It's personal. Trump's impeachment now seems just another Well, if you wish you guys would quit moving it. Trump's impeachment now seems just another in a multitude of thwarted opportunities to take back our country. What do you see as the number one priority to tackle pre-election?
Healthcare. I still believe that this is an election, just as 2018 was, about healthcare. And if you recall, in 2018, our candidates that we were supporting, they would call us about this point in the election because Donald Trump was running those scaravan ads, suggesting that people coming across the border in these caravans was the greatest threat to our lives. And the candidates would call and they would say, "Okay, I'm being asked by reporters, I'm being challenged by my opponent. What do I say about the caravans?" And you and I and our colleagues would say, "You remind them that Donald Trump and the Republicans have tried to take away your health care." Like, stay focused on what is affecting people's lives. And in this global, pandemic, we still have, by the way, the issue of the president trying to take away protections on pre-existing conditions and his failures of leadership in a healthcare crisis. I think healthcare is the motivating issue. And it's, again, one where we're for addition, expanding it, and they have demonstrably proved that they're for subtraction.
Next question. If Trump refuses to leave office, if he loses the election, what power does your committee have and what would you do?
I've given thought to this, and I know you and I take no pleasure in even contemplating in our great country that somebody would not leave peacefully, but you certainly have to prepare differently for this president. So what I say is the advice that when I played soccer in college, I would get from my coach. If I was complaining about the ref, he would say, "Well, Eric, don't make it close. If it's close, then the ref can affect the outcome." And as unfair as that may sound, if this election is close, that's where I see Donald Trump really thriving in the chaos, where he would have Bill Barr co-signing on his claims about mail-in balloting, filing frivolous lawsuits. He would have foreign interference helping him, probably from the Russians, amplifying stories of discord. And he would probably some way invite armed militiamen in their camo gear to protect him in some way, as they've done before at state capitals in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Kentucky. That's if it's close. If it's not close, I truly believe that, and I said this in the book, that Donald Trump is a coward and he will back down and he will quickly leave office. So don't let it be close. But functionally, if he is not the president, he is just an unwelcome guest. And I have confidence still that our military and Secret Service will do their jobs, but their jobs will be a lot easier if it's not close.
So you mentioned playing soccer in college. In fact, I think I read in your book that you attended college on a soccer scholarship, which was cut short. Correct me if I'm wrong here. You broke both thumbs in one
a sport
match.
Where you're not allowed to use your hand.
How do you break both thumbs in one match, Eric?
And also in a sport where you really shouldn't be using your hands, right? So I was a goalkeeper. Broke both thumbs. It was actually about 2 weeks apart. And Denny, I went to school in North Carolina. I picked the campus because, one, it was paid for, and I needed it to be paid for by someone other than our family with 6 of us, and I was the oldest, and others wanted to go to college. I wanted to play Division I. I was a little bit competitive at the time, and I wanted to play as a freshman. I didn't want to wait on the bench. So I don't think I'd advise anyone else to pick a college that way, but I ended up in rural North Carolina playing soccer. But after getting injured, probably the best thing that happened to me, that's when I interned on Capitol Hill and transferred to the University of Maryland.
So I want to remind viewers they still have an opportunity to submit questions. We have one more in the key. And so if you have a question, please type it in. Eric, next question is of House Democrats are remarkably united compared to past eras. How the heck did that happen?
Speaker Pelosi. She is, as you know, and in the book I described, Denny, I never met her before I was elected. I thought that she was like a ceremonial figurehead of the party. And yeah, exactly. So the first meeting I went to,
Eric, I'm going to do you a favor. I'm not going to tell her you said that.
I put it in the book and I gave her the book, so she's going to read it. But if you recall, tragically, during part of our congressional orientation, we were at the Harvard Kennedy School with Republicans and Democrats, and Sandy Hook happened. I think it was the last day, and I wanted to work on that issue. And so she invited any members that wanted to work on that issue to her office. And I believe this was the first couple of weeks that we'd been sworn in. And sitting in her office, she sits at the end of a long conference table. I saw that first day that she knew every single member. She knew their districts, she knew their spouses, she knew their kids, she knew the issues they cared about. And she also just institutionally knew how the place worked. She knew what it could do and what it couldn't do. And she's a phenomenal leader. She's also a generational leader, and she's a uniter. I mean, she knows, where she can take our caucus on different issues. And impeachment, I think, is a great example. She held out for a long time because she wanted to make sure that everyone felt comfortable, not just, the members, in the most liberal districts. And there's a chapter dedicated to her, just like Chairman Schiff. I mean, she really is remarkable in her ability to unite. As she has said just recently, that from Jim Cooper to Maxine Waters, she sees unity in our caucus on this post office issue. Jim Cooper represents one of the most conservative districts in Tennessee, and of course, the chairwoman of your committee, the Financial Services Committee, Maxine Waters, represents LA. And the speaker, when she sees unity, she can move us pretty fast. And I think that's why we're coming back to Congress so quickly on this issue.
Eric, your mention of Sandy Hook occurring while we were up at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government is very evocative. I was sitting directly across from Elizabeth Esty, the member of Congress from Connecticut who represented Sandy Hook. And somebody came in and leaned over before we knew what had happened and said something to her and handed her a note. And her face turned absolutely white. And she left and came back and then informed the rest of us of what had happened. It was shocking, stunning, heartbreaking, and I will never forget it. Eric, what's the best thing you learned from your run for president?
That's a great question, Denny. I really did learn that, experience, as I said, matters. And, there were a lot of great candidates in the field, and I love doing this job, but I really believe we have chosen, as we go into convention week, the best candidate, the most experienced candidate, someone who's handled the Great Recession, someone who worked on the Ebola crisis, and especially in a time of crisis like this, the voters, I think, feel very safe with Vice President Biden, and they trust that he can, lead us through this crisis. But I also, have learned that it's okay to take a risk. And, I suffered a setback personally, I guess. But once you make the decision to run, that's really the hardest part. And I learned so much doing it. And so I think it made me believe that it's okay to keep taking risks, whether it's politically for us as a caucus or me personally, in any future career moves. And I would advise people, I guess the campaign slogan was, go big, be bold, do good. And there was nothing about that experience that made me believe, I should stop doing that.
You don't regret impeaching Donald Trump. You'd do it again. You don't regret running for president, and you've now answered the question. You very well may do it again. How long were the days of work during impeachment, and how grueling was the travel schedule associated with it? And as West Coasters, we know this story very well.
There was no time limit on the testimony of the witnesses, and what they knew was vast. And so, Denny, some of these witnesses, it was 10, 12 hours, and sometimes it was 2 a days, to kind of use a sport term, right? We'd do witnesses back to back. I believe at least at one point we had a witness in we had one witness in one room and one witness in another room, and we were doing simultaneous depositions. And so we were working, but we were also responsible for representing our district and going home. And you and I, are big believers in, going back home, even if it's a rough ride from east to west and west to east. So it was worth it. It felt at the time like it was the most important thing that we could be working on. And I don't regret a second that we put into it.
Serving in Congress from the West Coast is particularly difficult because of the time difference and the travel schedule. It's about a 5.5 hour flight, and then you got to get home from the airport. I always, however, remind myself, frankly, the people who live in the have it worse. They have of air flight to get home, and then a long drive. So ours, generally speaking, is one long direct flight. Eric lives about 14 seconds from the airport. I have it much worse. Eric, how much damage has Trump done U.S. standing in the world, and how do we get it back?
He's taken a wrecking ball to really critical alliances. But if he is removed from office by you, we'll get it back. I'm afraid if he is elected to another term, it will be irreparable. And I think the best thing Joe Biden can do is to, nominate a very experienced, someone who's ready to, spend 250 days next year away from the United States on a global redemption tour and start to put us back into, alliances, whether it's NATO or even Australia. And I can't believe I'm saying that, but the president managed to alienate Australia.
Oh, okay. Final question. A little embarrassing. You are both such adept and engaging storytellers. Well, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Rep Swalwell, are you thinking of another book? Rep Heck, what's your latest book project? Eric, you got another one in the queue?
Denny, on the issue of gun violence, I think I have worked with so many survivors and people who, out of unimaginable tragedy, have picked themselves up and have become activists and have dealt with it in different ways. Some have run for office, like our colleague Lucy McBath. Others have kind of behind the scenes.
Lucy, time out. Lucy McBath is our colleague who lost her son to drive-by shooting. Just so that viewers know. Excuse me for interrupting.
No, it's important context. So I hope that first 100 days, new president, new Senate, our House majority expanded, that we do make the most sweeping reforms on gun safety, and that there's a story to tell there.
I'm embarrassed to feel compelled to answer that portion directed at me. My latest book project, I completed a book just before COVID-19 lockdown occurred, and was pretty pleased with it. Went through a significant editing process. Its title is Sausage. It's about what it's really like to serve in the United States Congress. What is that job like? However, the climactic and concluding chapter after the arrival of COVID-19 is no longer relevant. And so we're going to wait for the outcome of November 3rd. I'm going to rewrite that final chapter, and maybe I'll be honored enough to come back on this program with my book at that point. But
and
today
you had some successes in the CARES Act, especially around housing. Speaking of how the sausage is made, I mean, you really issues you had fought for a long time. You were able to see put into the CARES Act to help people need the most.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you, Eric. You're not only kind, you're a terrific author. Again, the book is Endgame, Inside the Impeachment of Donald J. Trump. You got the buy the book button on the bottom. I'm going to say it for the fourth time. You will not regret this. You will finish it very quickly because it is very readable, very interesting, very worthwhile contribution to our nation's understanding of the impeachment. Congressman Swalwell, thank you so much for coming up to.
Thank you, pal. Thanks, Denny.
And on behalf of Town Hall Seattle,
I tell those who have joined us.
On behalf of Town Hall Seattle, I want to thank everyone for tuning in this evening. And thank you to both congressmen for joining us. If you enjoyed this event, you can find many more like it on our website, townhallseattle.org. We hope you'll consider making a donation to Town Hall, as your support will allow us to continue to provide events just like this one, and perhaps we'll see both congressmen again in the future. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of Representative Swalwell's book, Endgame, Inside the Impeachment of Donald J. Trump, please use the link on this live stream page to purchase through our friends at Elliott Bay Book Company. And finally, thank you all again for being here this evening. We wish you well.
Thank you, guys.